You're going to prison for this." That was the first thing my HOA president screamed at me at 6 in the morning while I stood barefoot in my doorway, holding cold coffee, and wondering how changing a Wi-Fi password had somehow turned into a felony accusation. Her name was Brenda Carmichael, and in that moment, she was shaking with rage because of one tiny thing I had done. I changed my Wi-Fi password, and that simple click turned into police reports, an FBI investigation, and a federal sentence. My name is Garrett Finch. I work from home as a freelance designer, and a few months before all this, I thought I was finally leveling up in life. I moved out of a cramped, noisy downtown apartment into a subdivision called Oak Ridge, the kind of place with a brick entry sign. Tidy lawns, kids on bikes, and people walking golden retrievers at sunset. It felt boring in the best possible way, the kind of boring I thought I needed. Then I checked my mailbox, and reality showed up in a thick manila envelope. The HOA welcome packet was pages and pages of rules about grass height, paint colors, trash can placement, porch lights, and holiday decorations. I skimmed it, shrugged, and told myself what everyone tells themselves in an HOA community. As long as I kept things reasonable, nobody was going to bother me. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and met Brenda. Late 40s, sharp face, perfect ponytail, HOA polo clipboard, glued to her arm like an extra limb. "Hi, you must be Garrett," she said, with this big, warm smile. "I'm Brenda, the HOA president. Just wanted to welcome you personally." I thanked her, tried to be friendly, tried not to notice how her eyes kept sliding past me, cataloging my half-unpacked living room and the cables in my office. She gave me a smooth speech about community standards and protecting property values. Dropped the line, "Rules are rules," like a slogan. Then pivoted. What did I do for work? Did I work from home? Full-time. What kind of computer equipment did I have? What internet provider and speed? Any special hardware? I joked that I wasn't running a secret tech startup, just making logos in my spare bedroom. But the way she stayed locked on the topic of my Wi-Fi made my stomach tighten. Before she left, she handed me a form labeled Emergency Contact Information. It wanted my phone and email, sure, but also whether I lived alone, what hours I was usually home when I traveled. When I hesitated, her smile thinned just a little. "We really need everyone to cooperate," she said. I didn't feel like picking a fight on day 5, so I filled most of it out and watched her walk away. At the sidewalk, she glanced back at my house, pulled a small notebook from her pocket, and wrote something down. That tiny gesture stayed in my head, like a splinter. I couldn't quite dig out. The first HOA meeting drove it in deeper. Maybe 20 neighbors sat in folding chairs in the little community room, while Brenda stood at the front with a laptop and projector like she was presenting quarterly earnings. Slide after slide of minor violations popped up. Trash cans in the wrong spot, lawns a little long, a plastic flamingo that broke some rule, and every slide came with a lecture and the same line. If we start making exceptions, the whole system falls apart. Rules are rules. When it was time to welcome new residents, she called on me by name. I stood up, said I worked from home, sat down. She smiled like we had practiced it. "Since you rely on internet for your work, Garrett," she said. "Have you noticed any connectivity issues in Oak Ridge? Our community infrastructure can be sensitive to changes." People turned to look at me. I said everything was fine, and tried not to let my face show what I was thinking. Why is my Wi-Fi this woman's favorite topic? After the meeting, an older neighbor with a limp Hal shuffled over to me near the door. He nodded toward Brenda and quietly said, "Word of advice, kid. Do your best to stay off her radar. Life's easier that way. You know what I mean. I laughed and said I'd try. I did not yet understand how right he was. Within a week, the emails started. The first one said my porch light had been left on past approved hours, with a time-stamped photo of my house attached like evidence. The next one was about a weed in my driveway crack. Then my mailbox flag staying up too long. Each message came from the official HOA address, written like a legal letter signed, President Brenda Carmichael. Somebody was walking the neighborhood at night, taking pictures of porch lights and mailboxes, and somehow, I was the menace. I rolled my eyes, fixed what she mentioned, and tried to stay invisible. Around that time, my internet began to act strange. I was uploading design files one afternoon, and everything crawled. I logged into my router, assuming my provider was having issues, and saw two devices connected that I didn't recognize, both pulling a lot of data. I checked every gadget in my house, checked again. Nothing matched. That cold knot dropped into my stomach, yeah. That happened, so I did what any normal person would do. I changed the Wi-Fi password to a long, ugly string, kicked every device off, reconnected only my stuff, and watched my speeds jump back to normal feeling. Briefly proud of myself for being careful. I didn't know I had just unplugged part of a crime. The next morning at 6 came the pounding, not the doorbell. Hard fists on wood loud enough to rattle the frame. I rushed downstairs, thinking fire gas leak, something serious. I opened the door, and there was Brenda on my porch, in running clothes hair. Wild face red phone, clutched in her hand. "You changed your Wi-Fi password," she snapped. "Not a question. You need to put it back. Right now. You're affecting my devices." I stared at her, still halfway asleep. "I changed it because there were unknown devices on my network," I said. "That's my account, my equipment." "Why do you think you have a say in that?" She stepped closer, so I could see the anger in her eyes. "Everything in this neighborhood is interconnected," she said. "The HOA maintains oversight of technical infrastructure. You cannot make unauthorized changes. You're disrupting systems for other residents. This is a violation, Garrett." My heart was pounding, but my patience was gone. "Brenda, my Wi-Fi is not HOA property," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There is nothing in your rulebook that gives you my password. If someone had access before, that was the problem. I'm not changing it back." For a moment, the neighborly mask disappeared. Her face went flat, almost cold. "You're making a serious mistake," she said quietly. "I've tried to handle this neighborly. If you want to be difficult, I'll handle it formally. Violations, fines, documentation that follows you as long as you live here and shows up when you try to sell." "So you're threatening me over a password," I said. She gave a thin smile. "I'm explaining consequences," she said. "That's my job as president." Then she turned and walked away, already typing on her phone. At 10 that morning, the email hit my inbox. Subject line, "Formal notice of violation. Immediate action required." According to Brenda, I had disrupted community technical infrastructure, refused corrective action, and owed a $500 fine if I didn't restore my previous Wi-Fi setup within 24 hours. She cited HOA rules that, when I actually looked them up, talked about satellite dishes and exterior antennas, not private routers. Up to that point, I had swallowed my irritation to keep the peace. Seeing a lie that obvious with a price tag attached snapped something in me. I wrote a calm reply, quoted the correct rules back to her, said my provider confirmed my network was private, explained that changing my password after seeing unknown devices was basic security, and pointed out that if anyone had been using my network without permission, that was the real issue. I took screenshots of everything and dropped them into a folder called HOA. Her response came fast, and this time she copied the whole board. She called my email hostile, claimed other residents had suffered service problems because of me, and suggested that people who couldn't follow community standards might want to consider whether Oak Ridge was the right neighborhood for them. Overnight, I went from new neighbor to problem neighbor. Fewer waves, shorter conversations. People avoided eye contact on the sidewalk. Brenda told the story, and I became the villain in it. That's exactly where a lot of people would have folded, paid the fine, and handed over whatever she wanted. I couldn't. Instead, I started treating it like something I might have to prove later. I wrote down dates and times. I saved every message. I checked my doorbell camera whenever my gut told me to. That's how I caught her on video standing at the edge of my lawn taking pictures of my windows. That's how I saw her walk up to my front door at night and casually try the handle. No knock, just testing. That's how I watched her open my mailbox, pull out my letters, hold them up to the streetlight, and take photos before shoving them back in. A few days later, I found a plain white note folded in that same box. "Continued resistance will only make things harder for you," it said. "This is your final warning to comply." That note is the moment my fear finally turned into anger. Not long after, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Officer Kowalski with the local police department," the man said. "We've received a report of a disturbance and threats toward a neighbor at your address. Are you home right now?" You already know which neighbor filed that report. I told him I was home and that nothing like that had happened. He said 2 officers were on their way and asked me to wait inside. I had about 15 minutes to decide how this was going to go. I could open the door, ranting about Brenda, or I could open it with evidence. I chose evidence. By the time they knocked, my laptop was open on the coffee table with the email chain. The rule book, the screenshots, and the camera clips queued up. They came in expecting a loud argument to mediate. Instead, they watched my doorbell footage of Brenda trying my door handle at midnight. They saw her at my mailbox with my letters in her hand. They read the violation notice and the threatening note. They asked about the unknown devices on my network, and I showed them the router logs. You could see the shift in their faces as they put it together. Before they left, Kowalski handed me his card and said, "Keep recording everything. Don't talk to her if you can avoid it. Call me directly if anything else happens." A few days later, another call. "This is Agent Voss with the FBI Cybercrime Division," he said. "We've reviewed the report from your local department and the documentation you provided. We'd like to ask you some questions about your HOA president." That was the moment my little Wi-Fi fight turned into something much bigger. The FBI dug into Brenda's history and found that Oak Ridge wasn't her first HOA, and that in every neighborhood where she had served as president, there had been a quiet trail of residents dealing with suspicious credit card charges, missing mail, and identity theft that never quite added up on its own. When they executed a search warrant at her house, they found a spare room packed with small devices built to sit on home networks and copy traffic shelves of external hard drives and folders of scanned IDs and bank statements arranged by neighborhood and address, plus a notebook with my name at the top of a page and notes about my work schedule and clients. Changing my password had effectively kicked her off one of her favorite data sources, and everything she had done since, the violation, the fine, the gossip, the note, even the false police report, was basically her trying to bully me into turning that tap back on. A few months later, I sat in a federal courtroom with my neighbors and watched her stand in a plain jumpsuit while the prosecutor laid out charges of wire fraud identity, theft computer fraud, and mail tampering, all tied to years of using HOA authority as cover to get into people's homes and networks. The judge looked straight at her and said, "You exploited the trust of entire communities to prey on your neighbors, then sentenced Brenda to more than 20 years in prison and barred her from ever holding a position in a homeowners association again." As the marshals led her away, she glanced back at the rows of us in the gallery. Me Hal neighbors who had quietly blamed themselves for their financial mess. And our eyes met for just a second. No apology, no real emotion. Just a hollow, shocked look, like she couldn't quite believe her little kingdom was gone. Driving back through the Oak Ridge gates that afternoon, the neighborhood felt different. The new board started rolling back some of the pettier rules. People actually talked to each other at the mailboxes again. Kids played in the street without acting like they were being graded from every window. I still check my locks twice. I still glance at my camera feed when an unfamiliar car slows down. But the constant knot in my chest has turned into something else. This stubborn belief that it's worth pushing back when someone abuses their tiny bit of power, even if you get painted as the difficult neighbor for a while. And that's why I'm telling you this. We like to pretend serious crime lives somewhere far away, not behind tidy lawns and HOA newsletters. But sometimes the real danger is the person with the clipboard who thinks a title means total control. So if you were in my shoes, would you have handed over the password and paid the fine to keep the peace? Or would you have dug in and risked the backlash like I did? Do you think HOAs truly protect communities? Or do they just give people like Brenda way too much power? And have you ever had a boss, landlord, or neighbor use a tiny bit of authority to push you around until you finally pushed back? Tell me in the comments, because I honestly want to hear where you land on this and what you've seen in your own neighborhood.